Hi everyone, today is the 5th of March and this is going to be the first of a multi-segment video basically just going over the books which I have read so far for middle grade March, and there will be some spoilers for some of the books. I will be discussing Summer of My German Soldier by Bette Greene, which meets the prompt for a debut. Obviously this is a dinosaur of a book. It was published in 1973, but they didn't say like a current or contemporary debut, just a debut, and this was for the prompt about like an immigrant or refugee story. Isla to Island, or might be pronounced an Isla to Island, because obviously it's like Spanish. This is by Alexis Castellanos, and this is about a girl named Marisol who immigrates to the United States from Cuba, from Operation Peter Pan or Pedro Pan in Spanish. This was when like 14,000 Cuban children were sent on flights to the United States because their parents, wanted to protect them after Castro came to power. And many of them, ended up, and obviously it's very difficult to be separated from your family and going into the unknown, a strange new country, a language you oftentimes don't know, with like people you don't know many times. Marisol, it was never really explained, because this is, there are like words in the book, like for example there are like captions on some of the photos in the beginning, and most of the words in the book are Spanish, but I did like study Spanish for 7 years, so obviously I understood most of it, or the rest through context, or like sometimes later there would be like English words on the radio, but other than that there was no dialogue, so it's basically told like completely wordlessly. And that kind of reminded me of some of the best silent films that were told with like almost no intertitles. For example, the classic 1924 film, The Last Laugh. Oh, that's one of the most like moving silent films I've ever seen. I'm going to be reviewing that on my blog this year because it's, the 100th anniversary. But so anyway, you do not need words to understand this story. But getting back to the main point, it was never really explained like through any of the context in the pictures. Who exactly is this couple Marisol is staying by when she goes to Brooklyn? Did they like volunteer with the Catholic Relief Agency who was involved on the other end of Operation Peter Pan? Are they like distant relatives? Who are they? And the author says in her back matter, unfortunately, sadly, many of the children, they ended up, in group homes or as juvenile delinquents, because it was just, the culture shock and being away from the security of family was, just too much, unfortunately. But this story obviously does have a happy ending. And so anyway, this is like Marisol loves, the beautiful flowers in her native Cuba, and it starts out really, really, colorfully, showing like obviously Latin America is, famous for its lovely colors and like flowers and like, exotic like tropical citrus fruits and stuff. But when she, goes to, well, it's colored pages for, quite a long time, and it talks about, depicts the, the coming of the Cuban Revolution, and it just, becomes too unsafe to stay in Cuba any longer. So she, travels to the United States, and then it suddenly just turns, like depressing black and white, monochrome, because obviously like it's such a culture shock going from a colorful world to like, in comparison, like, whoever thinks of Brooklyn as like a beautiful place with lovely like flowers and stuff. Obviously like it has lots of nice parks and stuff, and some of the neighborhoods are like better than others, like with like trees and flowers and stuff, but on the whole it's like totally night and day. And so it's very difficult for Marisol to fit in at school. Like people throw stuff at her, like crumpled up pieces of paper, and they laugh at her, and she just like feels like, I'm totally alienated. No one speaks Spanish. I can't speak English very well. And she gets her first period during this book, and her foster mother teaches her how to use a pad with the old-fashioned belt. If you've read some of the Judy Blume's books, you might be like familiar with the concept of the old menstrual belt. Thank God that was never a part of my own lifetime. That was discontinued but like 8 or so years before I was born. And so anyway, she starts gradually, learning English through checking out books through the library, and the librarian and her foster mother realize, oh, this girl really loves like flowers and trees. Let's get her some books about those subjects. And her foster parents eventually, start taking her to the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. Let's see if there's any pictures of this in here. Like, oh, she just like looks to identify any of the trees in her own neighborhood. They live in like it appears to be like a floor through, I would guess, or at least at the very least, like a walk up in an old like row house or brownstone apartment. And so they basically, they're taking her to the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, and you can see like the color eventually starts seeping in, because it's just, such a it's basically like kind of, I guess maybe a little bit like the Wizard of Oz, like black and white suddenly emerges into beautiful color when the scenery, totally shifts, and color is used like strategically throughout the black and white. I thought that was like really well done. Although people who don't have, the at least a basic historical background about, what was going on in Cuba and stuff like that, they might be totally confused. But she does explain a bit in the back of the book, and now obviously then color starts again when she goes to the Brooklyn Botanical Garden many times for the, the cherry blossom festival, and like talking to her parents through the post. And there's also a recipe, and she goes around the city to all sorts of like nice places like the Met and Rockaway Beach in Queens, and Coney Island in Brooklyn, which, was still, it was far from its glory days by the early 60s, but it was still like not what it was. It became like later on. That's obviously the topic for a whole other thing, and like the changing of the colors with the seasons. But and there's also aforementioned a recipe. I felt it was kind of ruined a little bit, obviously not ruining the whole book, but at the end the author starts getting political, which I thought was like totally inappropriate, particularly for the generation. She basically like all but says like, oh, Marisol was privileged because like, oh, if she had had a different skin color or came from a different part of Latin America or immigrated in a different era, her story would have been so much worse. Well, yeah, obviously I'm aware of the existence of systemic privilege and colorism, but why do you have to bring that into a book? Like, you're basically depicting this girl having a very difficult time, like fitting in, like culture shock, being separated from her parents. And then you hit us with, oh, but by the way, she was really privileged because she didn't have like much darker skin, and she was Cuban, and so people were welcoming Cubans at that point in time. Then she starts talking about like illegal immigrants like being separated from their parents, or at least like alleged parents at the border, and how like Eisenhower like ordered the deportation of Mexicans during the 50s. Like, seriously, leave that crap out of a middle grade book. That is so like inappropriate. Why would you get political? And please keep in mind, I'm extremely far to the left, so I am not like a conservative at all when I criticize this like a woke hierarchy of oppression. And the second one is Summer of My German Soldier by Bette Greene. I had heard about this book for many years, but never actually read it myself. And I was like kind of, I wouldn't say like disappointed so much. It just felt like it wasn't exactly what I was expecting. And this is I believe it's 1944, and this is in the fictional town of Jenkinsville, Arkansas, which is based on Mrs. Greene's real life hometown of Parkin, Arkansas, where there were some nearby POW camps. And Patty is a 12-year-old girl who meets a 22-year-old. Keep that in mind for later. POW Anton, who was obviously they brought some German POWs to the US. I'm sorry, I'm like, this video is totally unscripted, and I don't think I had really heard about that prior. And so anyway, she meets him when he and the other guys are at the store, obviously under supervision. Her family runs a general store, and they're a department store. They're the only Jewish family in town, although they're originally from Memphis. And there's some bad blood. Her dad really does not like his in-laws, and Patty is very much like the ugly duckling stepchild. Her parents, particularly her father, really don't like her. While meanwhile, like little sister Sharon, oh, the golden child, she can do absolutely no wrong. I wish that had been explored a little bit. Like, why does her mother like constantly criticizing her? Oh, you're so ugly. Why don't you take interest in like traditionally a stereotypically girly stuff? Like, oh, why don't you just change your clothes 10 times before you go out like a proper girl? Or why don't you want to have curly hair like a normal young woman? Or like experiment with makeup? Why don't you have more friends? Like basically blaming her, while meanwhile the golden child is like totally perfect. And the father, it was difficult to read the scenes where he's like whipping Patty with a belt because he saw her talking to her, like sitting next to like a neighbor boy he derided as like poor white trash. Freddie, oh, you must be slutting it up. I must whip that out of you, even if you weren't even doing anything. She was just like sitting next to a boy. Like, it wasn't really explained why he is so like abusive towards her for these like little things. And particularly it seemed to, come out of nowhere instead of being like there from the jump. And so anyway, the POW Anton really impresses her with, he speaks perfect English. He's very, polite. His father is a college professor. And I realize it's kind of like flipping the whole expected thing of a German hiding a Jew with like a Jew hiding an escaped POW. But again, it's not, explained, like, why would he want to escape the POW camp? It didn't seem like they were like mistreating them particularly badly. They were just like working in the cotton fields, and so Patty hides him in this little like, annex, like secret room above the like garage in her house, and they know one another for maybe about a week at most, and he's only in the annex for a few days, so it's not really a whole summer. I just thought that was like making like more out of the thing than it really was. And remember, keep in mind, Patty is 12, Anton is 22, and like predictably she gets like kind of a schoolgirl crush on him, particularly because he's kind of written in this like, oh, totally like idealistic, perfect man way. And like, I mean, obviously that's understandable, but what's not understandable and what creeped me out when they're like saying goodbye, he doesn't want to get her in trouble by staying by her house longer than he has to and risking like suspicion and detection. He actually kisses her on the mouth, like seriously, even if it's just like a 2-second closed mouth kiss. That you're a 22-year-old man should not be kissing a 12-year-old girl or anyone who's underage. Like seriously, that's freaking creepy. Like even back in the day, that was not considered normal. Like historically, most couples were about like post antiquity were about like 1 to 6 years apart, with a few notable exceptions like medieval and Renaissance Italy and then medieval Slavic countries. But definitely in 20th century America in the 1940s, like grown-ass men in their 20s were not going around like perving on preteen or teenage girls. That's ew. I mean, it's one thing, I mean, like there were some age differences that were less pronounced in the back in the day, like let's say like a 17-year-old dating someone who's like 21, 22 and like 1930 or whatever. That would be like different, but this is like 12 and 22. That's creepy and gross and illegal. Like she could have made Patty a little bit older, like maybe 17, even 16, or Anton maybe made him a little younger, so the age difference was not creepy or illegal. Like WTF. And also later she gets discovered because Anton gives her a valuable gold ring before he leaves, and Patty, she just can't stop blabbing to people, oh, look at this ring, and I'm making up a story about it. She makes up several stories throughout the book, and of course her father hears about it and whips her for it, and she like makes up another story, and they eventually figure out, oh, it really did come from this German POW dude who escaped, and she goes through a trial and gets sent to reform school. But none of the trial is actually in the book. It's just like narrated, like the highlights like after the fact, which was kind of disappointing. I understand sometimes you will need like a wraparound narrative segment for like events that are like important to know about to and understand the whole story, but you don't need to see them like depicted in blow by blow detail. Like for example, a character has a long illness, but you'd only need to see like the highlights of that. But this wasn't something you can just like skip over with a couple of like wraparound passages. Why aren't we like shown the actual trial? Like it's kind of just seems like why would you do that? Like, and so basically they capture Anton, and like they find out she was like involved in it, and then she's being driven off to reform school after the trial, and her parents, even her loving grandparents from Memphis, don't come to see her. The only one who cares about her is her the black maid and housekeeper Ruth. Like she was like hands down the best character, the only one who shows her actual, besides Anton, any affection. I just thought, and the book also kind of ends in media res. That also really disappointed me. But anyway, I have to go to the library to return these books, and I will be discussing the Rebecca American Girl books in the next segment of this video. Today is the 7th of March, and this is going to be the final segment for my week 1 wrap up of Middle Grade March. I'm going to be doing the first 3 Rebecca books in the American Girl series, because this meets the immigration prompt, particularly the second book. I'm not going to be like going over the fifth and sixth books in the series, because obviously I want to keep this video like fairly short, and unfortunately they didn't have the 4th book at any of the local libraries, so that's really unfortunate. But maybe I can buy it online. And I would also like to add on to the book which I was talking about in the previous segment, Betty Greene's Summer of My German Soldier, because the video wasn't scripted. I kind of forgot I wanted to mention this. I did mention obviously like Anton, who's 22, remember, like kisses 12-year-old Patty, which is like gross and sick, and it's maybe like 2 seconds like in a closed mouth. But it's not just that, he also like a bit before that, like basically says, oh, I love her. And it's basically very obviously he's talking about in a romantic way. Like that's gross and creepy. I do understand. I believe the author's motivations were good. Sorry about that obnoxious noise on the street outside if it's picking on camera. Like she wanted to tell a story very autobiographical to herself, and what one which many young readers would also relate to, the very like alienated by herself, like child. She's like neglected, ignored by her parents, like the golden child. A younger sibling gets all the attention, no one really understands her, and she meets this guy, or I guess it could be like just a mentor, a teacher. It doesn't have to be like a romantic like schoolgirl crush like in other people's circumstances. And so basically this person shows her, really, I'm worth something after all. Someone really appreciates me for me, and this person would even like risk his own safety to protect me from my abusive like dirtbag father, who's like whipping me because, oh God forbid, I was sitting next to a boy. Oh no, so that must mean I was like doing things with him. So I do like understand her like message. It was a good one, but it's just like, why would you have to, like, a 22-year-old man and a 12-year-old girl, like implying that could be a love story that could work out? Like, I mean, I can understand like if they knew one another very like briefly but never were like friends at all, like just barely knowing one another, and then like lost touch for years and then got back in touch when the younger girl was now like an adult, and then they started a relationship then. But I can't say enough about how grossed out I am when like the people try to pretend like, oh, it's totally normal for extremely underage girls to be like dating men who are like legal adults. Like, I rant over. And so I was going to start with the Meet Rebecca by Jacqueline Dembar Greene. Yeah, Dembar Greene, I'm sorry. And this is obviously, it starts in 1914, and Rebecca lives in the Lower East Side. Rebecca Rubin, and she has two older sisters, twins, Sophie and Sadie, and older brother Victor, and the younger brother Benny. And she's really like hoping to help bring her cousins and aunt and uncle to America in this book. And she's like saving up, earning money. She's really good at crocheting and stuff. She has all these like lace runners and doilies and scarves and stuff. And her grandmother, her bubby, is like, oh, this is so wonderful. So many girls these days no longer make a trousseau. Like, but and her sisters and mother are like, trousseaus are kind of outdated, bubby. And so Rebecca realizes, oh, people are volunteering to buy this for me when they see it in the store, and I'm not even like deliberately selling it. Now, wow, this can maybe help to get some ship tickets. Obviously not nearly the full price of even one child's ticket and steerage passenger, but at least could help to get my family to America. And then she's also hoping to buy some candlesticks so she can light Shabbos candles for herself. The mitzvah starts for girls when they are 3 years old, so I don't know why they keep going on in the books, oh, you're too young, you're just a baby, you're not old enough to light yet. I mean, it's one thing if they're saying, I'm sorry, Rebecca, we don't have enough money for candlesticks for all the ladies of the household, but to say like you're not old enough when like by Jewish law she's definitely old enough. She's 9 years old. The mitzvah obligation starts when you're 3 years old. And so along the way she comes to realize like helping my cousin and her family come to America is a lot like better thing I can do to raise money for than just buying candlesticks for myself, because it can't wait for them to come to America, particularly because it's 1914 and World War One is starting. And I also thought it was kind of weird. A lot of other people did notice, but it's explained in the second book. But I think that's kind of like a cop out after the fact. Her grandparents are called Bubby and Grandpa, and it says in the second book, oh, Grandpa wants to go by that name instead of Zadie because he wants to show how American he is. But then why is he, so religious and old-fashioned and traditional? I really think it was because the author realized, oh, oops, I have a character named Sadie, and having the grandpa called Zadie and a sister named Sadie, that would be too confusing. So, like, why not just rename the sister? That just, like, call her maybe Sally or something to go with Sophie. That just seemed like, kind of really, like, planning that didn't, she didn't think that one through all the way. And also it's talking about, like, there were a couple of, like, historical inaccuracies I discovered. They're talking about Rebecca's cousin, Anna's older brothers. They're terrified they might be conscripted into the Tsar's army. And obviously that was a huge, like, problem. Like, underage Jewish boys were being, like, kidnapped to serve in the Tsar's army during the first half of the 19th century. But that was actually, like, abolished in 1856 after the Crimean War. And it took about 3 years to be, like, fully implemented, no longer kidnapping these boys into, like, training military schools, like, forced conversions, like, forcing them to eat, like, pig meat, not allowing them to go back to live by their families, after they were of age and out of the military. But that was definitely no longer a thing by 1914. I mean, obviously there was still a lot of anti-Semitism in the the Russian Empire, and almost no Jews lived in Russia proper. They had to live in the Pale of Settlement, which was predominantly, like Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Eastern Poland. There were like a couple of places here and there in Russia proper, like for example, Petrovichi, where Isaac Asimov was from. But like by and large, like most Jews in the Russian Empire were not from Russia. But I do realize, like at the time of this story, they would have thought of it as Russia because like republics like Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania, they unfortunately were under Russian occupation, so they didn't have their independence yet. And as I mentioned in the Middle Grade March Pile of Possibilities video, like the spelling Anna with only one A, that's not a Russian spelling at all. It's always with two N's. That's more of a Spanish Portuguese spelling. I believe it's also like Slovenian and a couple of other like Slavic languages have that as a spelling, but it's definitely not Russian. And also it was very, very uncommon for Jews in the Russian Empire in that era to have, like secular Russian names. Her name would have been like, Hannah, which is my own Hebrew name, or they would have had, like Yiddish names. It was even like illegal for many people and for many years to change their names to like say like Russian or Ukrainian or Belarusian, like Lithuanian, whatever. Obviously they would have had Russification in those other countries under like Russian occupation, whatever, but like they would not have been able to change their names or like give their children like, Russian like first names and surnames. It just like, wasn't done. So that was just a big, like it really, really, stuck out to me. And there's a thing about, Rebecca really wants to be an actress, and she's particularly like happy because her cousin Max, her mother's brother, is like, he's like in the acting business, and he's like really, really getting serious about it. And he's changed his name from Moishe to Max, and he has like changed his last name to Shepard. Let me just see what his legal name is. His original name is Moishe Shereshevsky, and he changed it to Max Shepard because he wants to fit in and have a better chance of getting a movie career. Unfortunately, there was so much institutionalized systemic anti-Semitism. Many people just felt like, I need to change my name so I can pass for like a WASP better, or like a Christian American, because it was just so unfortunately like they saw a name like, for example, my second favorite male actor of the sound era, Edward G. Robinson. His original name was Emmanuel Goldenberg. That definitely would not have, got people going to see his movies. They would say, "Oh, that's not someone I like," because like it would have given away his like actual, ancestry. But anyway, that's just like really unfortunate. And I'm so glad people no longer feel like they have to change their names to, like fit into like a one idea of what it means to be a so-called proper American. And this is the second one, Rebecca and Anna, the surprise, surprise, all the family manages to come to America because they, help to raise money. And I should also mention, I forgot, this is unscripted in the first book, Rebecca is helping her father at his shoe store, and they walk to work and stuff. And they, unfortunately, again, because of, the era, they have to work on Saturdays. Many Jews they felt like, there was no other way. I have to like earn a livelihood to support myself and my family, and there's no laws yet saying like you should only be working like 5 days a week. And if forget about the 8-hour workday. This was before the labor movement, like all these wonderful like innovations improving the working class lives. But so anyway, like they're like going to work on Saturday, and that's again like something thankfully we no longer have to deal with. Like people understand like, the Establishment Clause, maybe we should respect people who aren't all like Christian Americans, whatever. And so anyway, and there is like some trouble in this book because one of Anna's brothers is detained on Ellis Island. He, hurt his leg on the ship, and they're like worried, oh no, that might be infected, or maybe it'll be cut off and we have to deport him because we can't let anyone into America who's less than 100% perfect. And they had like so many like weird, like effed up like excuses for sending people back. Like, for example, a woman had like a black fingernail, or someone had an odd looking, scar or birthmark. Oh, that might be contagious. Send you back. You're not perfect. Yeah, there's a lot of, the, like anti-immigrant sentiment in the U.S. in the like late 19th, early 20th century. It was definitely like inspired by eugenics, but that's obviously a whole other like off-topic rant for another thing. And there is, Rebecca's aunt Fania changes her name to Fanny. Again, that's more of like a Russian like Christian name. That wasn't so much of like a Jewish name as far as I'm aware of. Like maybe it was also like a crossover Yiddish name with a different etymology, but it's just like, can you at least like try to give these people like actual like authentic names? And the uncle's name is Jacob. It would have been like Yaakov, like in the Russian, or like the Yiddish or the Hebrew. And the brothers like Joseph and Michael, it would have been like, well, Michael is like a Hebrew name, but like Michael, that's more of like an American like English name and Joseph with it would have been like Yosef or Yosef in the Hebrew. I'm a name nerd, so these things like just kind of like pop out to me, and like Rebecca's wondering, oh, maybe it wasn't a good thing to tell Aunt Fanya she should change her name to Fanny so she can like blend into like American English speaking society. But then she's like, oh, maybe it is a good thing because she voluntarily like was happy when I told her she should change her name, and Anna has to change her wardrobe. And I was kind of a bit annoyed. There was a lot of jingoistic flag waving in the book, and like for example, they're getting a new flag for the classroom to celebrate getting 48 states, but this happened in like 1912. Why are they just getting a flag now? I really probably just like to advance the plot, and the class has to memorize a bunch of like jingoistic flag waving poems and sing like patriotic jingoistic songs, and Rebecca is like horrified because Anna is like chosen to ask to sing a song with her, and she can't pronounce all the words properly. So why is the teacher like making the new student who can not speak English very well sing a song in English at a huge assembly, particularly because they're have to be moving out of the Rubens' house soon to get into their own place in a different part of the neighborhood, because like Tompkins Square Park is mentioned in these books, I'm presuming, and also because they've like moved up past the tenements in places like Orchard Street, so they're presumably living in the more northern area, the Lower East Side, which like now is the so-called East Village, but back then it was just the more gentrified, better, like slightly more well-to-do like area of the Lower East Side. And also there was another inaccuracy in this book at the time. Like people did not, I mean, this is a really, really triggering thing for me because of my history with this like bizarre ritual when elementary school. But anyway, like in 1914, students were not like reciting the creepy, sorry, not sorry, daily loyalty oath to the flag indoctrination ritual with a hand over the heart. That's creepy enough, but they did it with something called the Bellamy salute, which I am not going to demonstrate because it looked exactly like the Nazi salute. So yeah, way to make the daily loyalty oath to the flag even creepier. Like, like find me one other country in the world that makes students recite a daily loyalty oath to the flag. That's just why are Americans so obsessed with this like fetishistic worship of the flag? I don't like to get political, but that's just what it is. And this is the third book in the series, Candlelight for Rebecca. It's a big conflict because the teacher, like many other teachers of immigrants, particularly in large cities like New York of the era, she's like, oh class, we all have to make Christmas themed decorations and art class to bring them home to our parents. And when one of Rebecca's friends tries to say like, I don't celebrate Christmas, the teacher's like, oh nonsense, little girl, everyone celebrates Christmas, it's an American holiday. No, it's not, it's a Christian holiday. And I was kind of disappointed. The moral seems to be like, yeah, you should go along with like being made to do Christmas decorations in school as long as you're true to who you are behind closed doors. So I realized that was like historically realistic, pass as a good little wasp in public, but maybe be as religious as you can be in private, even with all the restrictions and stuff, like having to work on Saturdays if you wanted to make a living and all stuff like that. But it just seemed kind of like a bad message to send. Like maybe it would have been better if she had said, and all the other Jewish girls in the class said, we celebrate Hanukkah, not Christmas. This isn't our holiday. And the teacher should have particularly known, working in a heavily Jewish neighborhood like the Lower East Side. But at the time it was believed like teachers in particular had to indoctrinate these new immigrants into being so-called like real Americans, and that included like celebrating Christmas and like forcibly changing their names to English ones without telling the students. Rebecca's friend Rose, she's an immigrant, her name was originally Rivka, but the teacher said, oh, you're Rose now, I can't deal with that icky foreign like gross name. Oh no, you have to be Rose, a proper English name. And like her parents didn't even know she was changing her name. So, and just but it was like a good, I guess it was a good message for little kids, but it was another complaint. I mean, I'm not trying to say like I hated these books, it's just I noticed all these little things about it, particularly as a historian and a name nerd. Like this seems to be one of those multicultural children's books that's very explainy. For example, stopping the forward momentum to deliver info dumpy dialogue about a religious custom or holiday. Like why are the characters like talking to one another in detail about things they're already very well aware about, or like to their friends, or maybe like it would make sense if they were explaining it to someone who had no familiarity with the holiday, like for example a new Christian friend. But like I just really don't like that. Just like do it in like the narrative text or a little bit in the glossary. Believe it or not, children can often like understand from context what a holiday is. You don't have to explain it. But I did appreciate how the author made it clear Hanukkah is about defeating the Greeks who were trying to force us to, follow their religion and give up, Jewish culture and identity and religion instead of, oh, it's all about the miracle of the light lasting for 8 days. And it's because people just want to sweep under the rug that people were, our ancestors were fighting like assimilation and giving up our heritage. And yet another thing, I really don't care how you choose to spell it, that's your own thing, rock on. But the spelling Hanukkah with an H and two Ks, that's more of a late 20th century North American development. The traditional spelling, which definitely would have been used mostly in 1914, is like the CH and 1K, which is the spelling I personally use because, that is the more like traditional religious spelling. But like other than that, I really, did enjoy these books. I just felt like because, it's the first major Jewish character with her own like series line in this like series, I just felt like, it was more like, oh, let's explain all this like stuff to the kids and make it, less about, oh, just effortlessly, weaving it in and out and making it about like being proud to be like religious and traditional and Jewish instead of feeling like, oh, being secular and assimilated as a real American is what you want to drive for. Even if you're religious and, private, you should always be a good little American in public. But anyway, rant over. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be doing another wrap up for week 2 of Middle Grade March next week. So thank you for watching all the way through. If you have, I'm sorry if I got a little bit too like political during certain parts of this video, but it was, relevant to the books discussing, not out of thin air. And please consider leaving a comment for me. I really like having conversations with you guys. So I'll see you again very soon. Bye.